Welcome to the Real Estate Women's Podcast. Thanks for pulling up a chair to our roundtable discussion. Here, we'll teach you how you can create a stream of passive income through multifamily investing, and we'll help you to shift your mindset so you can start living the life you really want to be living by design today. Hello, guys. Welcome to the Passive Investing Podcast. I'm Crystal.
I'm Colleen.
And I'm Tamara, and we are the Real Estate Women. Today, we're going to be discussing credit score. And we're going to be discussing tips and tricks on what you can do to obtain and maintain a high credit score. We want to start the conversation with the basics. What is a credit score really? Colleen, would you like to elaborate?
Sure. Credit score is one of the most important measures of your financial health. It tells lenders how responsible you are. It can impact multiple areas of your life. For example, your ability to obtain a loan, to buy a home, for business and job opportunities, and a lot more. Basically, there's a range from poor at around 300 to excellent around at 850. So, Crystal, let's get into how do we obtain a good credit score?
Well, definitely starting with the basics, it starts by actually having some credit. And that starts with doing something about that. So, are you going to get a loan? Are you going to get a credit card? Because until that happens, you don't have a score. Because when you first get a credit card, you actually won't get a credit score as soon as you open it. It actually takes about 6 months to get a credit score. And where that number starts at is 100% dependent on what you do in those 6 months. So it can really range. It could be all over the map. 500 to 700 like on a scale. So it all depends what you do. So if you're the listener who has not got that credit card yet, this is the perfect place for you to be, because we're going to start with some tips and tricks, what you can do in those 6 months to start off by having a golden credit score. And man, gosh, there's a lot. What do you think? Where would you say if you had no credit at all before, Tamara, what would you recommend? What would you think is the easiest place to start? Do you think it's like a loan or a credit card? What would you say?
Well, I would say a credit card. I would start with a credit card. I think that's probably the easiest thing to obtain. Sometimes they might even want you to guarantee it with your own funds, and then it will then change into a credit card. But there's different types of how credit's reported, because loans are like installment. If you take a loan on a car, it's a fixed payment, and then that's installment loan. And a credit card is like a variable amount of payments. And so but I would start with a credit card.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like Colleen had mentioned before, credit is it's your record, it's your financial history. So a bank isn't gonna really want to give you a loan, right? If you have no history and you're out there like, hey, I'd like to buy this $60,000 brand new car, they might be like, I don't. So starting with that securely backed credit card sounds like a really easy way to go, and then have that slowly transitioning and, getting that as soon as possible also is super, super helpful. Because not having any way to show the bank that you're responsible is really tricky. What for you, Colleen, what was like your first credit? Like, what's the first credit you got when you were younger?
So my first credit card was actually when I was like 16. My parents just wanted, to teach me the basics of credit, how to spend on it and pay it back. So I did have a credit card when I was 16, and I want to say it had a $500 or $1,000 limit on it. So it wasn't out of reach for me to pay it off with my part-time job that I had. They taught me to just go out and I'd put my gas on it for the week. For a couple of weeks, when I got my paycheck, I'd pay it off. And it just slowly built credit that way. They would then increase my limit and allow me to spend some more. And, just slowly learn over time to purchase your daily things on it, but make sure you're paying it off. Because if you don't pay it off, it comes with that percentage of interest that you have to pay back above it. And we didn't want to do that. My parents definitely got me into it when I was young and wanted to start and build that. And it was also a backup for other things, right? If you didn't have cash and something happened, I had a couple $100 there that I could spend if needed and take the time to pay it off. So it was just a learning thing, but I don't know. I think it was a good thing that I got into it at a young age and learned with a smaller dollar amount, right? Because I don't know that you should go out and get a $10,000 credit card. But, $500, like I said, $500 to $1,000 is something that you should be able to pay off relatively easy if you use it without having any trouble. What was your first experience?
For me, it was the same. It was a credit card. It was a small amount. I used it for the same type of fuel. It's always fueling. That's what teenagers do. You use fuel, and I paid I paid it all off at the end of the month. I was always taught, like, think of it as a debit card. Like, you only spend what you have in the bank, and you have 100% intention of paying off at the end of the month. Because otherwise, as soon as, like you said, that rate hits, it's just crazy. I thought of it. I did not differentiate between my debit card and my credit card. I treated them exactly the same. If I spent it on a credit card, it was good as the cash coming out of my bank for me. And that was a really good mindset thing for me. Like, this is cash. Like, this is not, it's not a giant net that's going to allow me to overspend more than what I have and then eventually fall in the hole. So I don't think I ever was in that mindset of it being like, this is credit that I have to spend, and I don't have to pay it back until I feel like it. Like, for me, I was never taught that that's the way it was. Like, I knew it, but that was never how I used it. And I'm very thankful for that now, knowing what I know. How about you, Tamara?
Well, the same. It was a credit card.
How about your loan?
Off the record, my first loan was from my grandma to buy a car.
Wow.
Which then she gave me I paid her off early. So I had a letter of recommendation from her, and then I got a credit card.
Yeah. Well, so then there are some key points, right? Like, once you get that credit, the next step is to be savvy with how you use it in making the right decisions to make sure you're increasing, not decreasing your credit score.
Sure.
So I guess who'd like to start off that discussion?
Well, I know one thing that I always try to think about is the utilization portion. Like, I try never to use more than a third of my credit. Like, I'll be mindful, like, even if I have a credit card, let's just say 10 grand was the credit limit, I would make sure I never spent more than 3 grand. And even if I spent 3 grand on that, I just paid it off right away before I started spending another penny. So would I spend more than 3 grand on that credit card in 1 month? Maybe, but I would never allow the balance to be over that. I would prefer to make an extra payment mid-month to make sure it never got over that 30%. And I've found that is a huge thing because, your credit score is taken by the 3 different credit bureaus at all different times. So at any point in time, that ping could happen and be pulled. And that's why if you're someone who tracks your credit score, you can see like such a variation. And one of them might hit after you had just paid one of your credit cards because it's due on the 15th and the other one's due on the 1st. And maybe that one was up a little bit higher. It's, if you make it not a game of chance and you never use over that 30% on any given card, it's really going to really help you to keep that high credit score and keep your credit score going up. What about you, Tamara? What's a good strategy a good go-to tip for you that you like to use a lot in your personal life?
Well, I think I'm going to backtrack just a tinge because you mentioned on something about reporting to the credit bureaus, and we haven't really touched on that there's actually 3 credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And then that's where I think that's part of educating our listeners, talking about credit score. And my exposure has been not all credit cards or not all loans or not all things that report to all 3 bureaus. So you could have different scores with the 3 different bureaus. And that's something not to be alarmed by, that why do I have a slightly different score with one bureau versus another? And that's really the reason why, is because they don't report to all 3 and they could report to all 3, say a credit report, but report, like you said, on different dates. So then there's a variation and there's a flow to it. So as far as a trick I would say to share is, you've built up your relationship or your credit history with the card, and maybe you need to keep a balance that's over like the 30%, threshold that gives you like the maximum benefit of a continuation of building your credit score, is to ask for a credit, increase at some point. A couple $1,000s could help you stay in that range in the event that you do need to hold a balance for a couple months or a month or 2.
Yeah.
What about you, Kelly?
Yeah. So something else I learned more recently in doing some research, because I have teenagers that want to build credit. I don't really want them to have credit, but no, I do. But, a tip that I learned in doing some research is that you can become an authorized user on somebody else's card. They add your social security number. You don't even have to give them a card. But if I added my son to my card and I just continued to spend on it and pay, and pending my credit is good, that would impact him in a positive way. So I thought that was kind of cool. He really doesn't even have to do anything, but by being a user and me spending and me paying it can help boost him. Now in that same light, if you're added as a user on somebody with poor credit that never pays anything, it could negatively affect you. So you do have to be aware of who you're giving your information to and allowing to add you.
I was not aware of that. No, because I've added our daughter, Abby. I gave her the card though. I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't know that
She's
either.
abusing it, but I didn't know that I could just add her without giving her the card. But anyway,
I'm sure she's
separated. I guess I should have realized that. So anyway,
here's a card, but you can't spend on it.
Right? No, meaning that it's not like it's separated of the charges. You know what I mean? Like it's just one reporting. So it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah. And it's still going to come as one bill. Even if they do separate on there, hey, this card put this on it and this card put this on it, it's still one.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's definitely good and helpful.
Yeah.
I would say another thing too that a new feature in the property management software that Teddy and I use for our rentals, there's a feature where you can our tenants have the option of having their rent payments reported to the credit bureau. There's a nominal fee for it, but for some of our apartments are on, the smaller side, they're good for first-time renters. That's been hugely beneficial for a lot of our young tenants straight out of college. Parents are co-signing, they're building their credit, and that little fee for doing something they're already doing that gets reported is really something that can make a big difference. So I would say, I would recommend anybody who is doing things like that, if you're renting or any other type of payments you pay consistently, really do your research and see maybe it's something that you can get reported to the credit bureau to help adding history to that credit score. Because really when it comes down to it, it's about that history, that payment, which also leads to something we've discussed before. The history of your credit is really, really, really important. So if you have that one credit card that you got as a teenager and, you've got new, more flashy credit cards that have better points and features and higher limits, never close that account. Don't close that first account, because the age of your credit is another factor. And if you close that older account that you had for 5 years before anything else, well, your credit history just got 5 years shorter. So that's another determining factor that is something you can be mindful of. And those little things you can see on things like Credit Sesame and Credit Karma, right? I'm sure, do you ladies ever use that type of stuff to keep track of your credit score? What's your thoughts on that type of stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think since you mentioned that too, and Tamara had mentioned the 3 bureaus, don't forget at least once a year, you should pull your credit report, because every year you can get a free one. And you should look for errors and dispute them. If something is wrong on there and it's not accurate and it's saying you still owe somebody or something's in collections, you should be making those phone calls and correcting that. Don't let it sit there. I mean, that is your right to try to dispute that and say, no, that's not right. I never charged that. That wasn't mine, whatever. Even I know some people who are like a junior and a senior. And in that aspect with parent and child, things have been messed up before. So you just never know. It definitely, you should be looking at your credit score at least once a year and then, fixing any of those things that are reported on the credit report.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I know I really, really like the different, the Credit Sesame's, Credit Karmas of the world that help you. You can log on for free and track your credit. And sometimes it can be interesting to read what's affecting your credit score right now. Those little things can be really helpful, because you might be like, man, I'm paying everything on time. What am I doing wrong? And then it might be, okay, your credit utilization. Well, maybe like Colleen said, you're keeping 30%, but you have a car loan and all of that. And maybe you should ask for credit limit increases, even if you're not using that 30%. Or maybe it's just a history thing. And it gives you kind of those tips on what's affecting your score. So you can then look a little more granularly and see what you can do. What steps can you take to make your credit score better? Because, I don't think we even mentioned really the importance on this particular episode of it, because if you don't having good credit really truly does affect everything in life. Your ability to rent an apartment, your ability to purchase a car, get a loan, any of that stuff. It can be really good.
A house.
Yeah, a house, of course. Yeah, got that one. Yeah.
Make investments down the road.
Yes. Yes. Got to start somewhere. Definitely.
And then that's where too, to touch upon, obtaining and getting that higher credit score. I'd like to touch upon the benefits of having that, higher credit score. You get better interest rates on loans and better credit limit.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if you, are shopping for something new or, needing to obtain a loan for any purchase of any kind, that's just it's the benefit.
Yep. Well, yeah. And sometimes it makes or breaks you when we're all in multifamily.
Right.
I've got a threshold of who I'm going to rent to, and I need to because, well, maybe not in my case because rentals is kind of not my everyday job. But Crystal, when you're, self-employed and that is your business, you depend on that rent to pay your living expenses and your business. Mm-hmm. So, you have a minimum threshold at which you'll take. Unfortunately, you can't accept everybody. So, obviously the higher you have, the better off you are for those opportunities.
Yep. 100%. And I know I will say probably the biggest thing that when I see a credit score, if I see somebody at like a 600, you know what I mean? Because our limit, we try to stick 650 is really, we don't want to go too below that. But if like you're at like 599 or you're right at that 600 and you see in the credit report that there was like, there was a little blip that you had for like 5-6 months a year ago, you know what I mean? It was that short period of time. But now in the past 18 months, you've been paying everything on time. You've been super responsible. You've obtained your job and it's this job that qualifies for 3 times the monthly rent. I'm going to be like, you know what? This person is trying. This person has shown financial responsibility for the past 18 plus months, because I know that's something we require. If you're on that low end, you have to at least show financial responsibility for the past 18 months, because if not, like Colleen said, the rent is going to be one of the things that is probably not going to be paid first, because it's a lot harder to make that payment. So that's definitely something that happens, but never be discouraged. Don't give up. Don't be like, oh, I ruined my credit. That's not true. There's always things you can do. Pay attention, go on the credit sesames, take all the steps that you can and make every payment on time. When it's the history is reporting that you're paying as agreed, you're making all the necessary payments on time. That's definitely a huge thing. So definitely if you're that person that, you had great credit once, but there's a big hiccup in the road, that happens. It happens to every single person at some point in life. Just do what you got to do. Buckle down, make sure you're bare minimum paying the minimums on all the accounts. What is it that they say? Start with the smallest step first or the highest interest debt and then work from there. Anything possible to get back to where you want to be.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think some people are also afraid to pick up the phone and call some of their credit cards and ask, right? But your credit card would rather see that you call them and say, listen, what you're charging me with interest right now, I can't pay. So I'm not going to pay it. Or like, let's make something out. Can I pay $200 a month at this? Can you leave the interest rate something flat? Can we lock something in? I'll sign an agreement. And a lot of credit card companies would rather know that you're trying to pay them, that you're going to consistently pay them something, than for them to keep tacking on late fees, raising your interest rate. Now you're supposed to pay $3,000 this month and every month because you're so far behind, and they're not going to see a penny of that. So pick up the phone and call them, because most of them will negotiate with you. They understand, sometimes you can do with your car loans. You could do a deferment for a month. Hey, I lost my job. I don't have the money for that car payment. And they'll tack it on the end of your payment cycle. So there are things that you can ask sometimes. If you just pick up the phone and you're willing to talk to somebody, explain your situation, they are willing to work with you most of that time, because receiving some money is better than receiving no money.
That is 100%. Such a good tip, Colleen. Communication is key. And I'm sure you guys as landlords feel the same way. Communication is key. If you know that they're trying, that's like 2 gold stars right off the bat. I absolutely love that. And man, ladies, this conversation has been so great. We've really gone into some really great and helpful tips and tricks. I think just talking about the fact that your credit score truly is the most important measure of your financial health is so huge. in between the various tips and tricks, I hope all of our listeners out there find that valuable, some helpful things. You know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That is such a good point. You never know until you ask. And I hope you guys took a lot of value and found that this was very informational. And, remember that credit impacts so many areas of your life. So, do that extra Google search if you need to. We want to thank all of our listeners. We want to say thank you guys a ton for joining us here at the Round Table. If you want to learn more, check us out on our Instagram, our Facebook, and of course, YouTube. You can always check us out also at our website, therealestatewoman.com. So thank you guys so much. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only. We are not licensed professionals and do not give investment advice, tax advice, or other professional advice. Please consult a licensed professional before making any financial decisions.